This e-lecture is coming from the additional reading provided to you in this course from Cormier Nurius Osborn. It is part of Chapter 2, only a small segment of pages 23 to 30, and it's Chapter 2, Building Your Foundation as a Helper, and the subtopic on this chapter, which is what we're going to focus on during these 7 pages, is Serving Diverse Populations, Multicultural and Multi-Ethnic Considerations. So let's get started. So when you serve diverse populations, here are just some definitions that I want to make sure we're all on the same page about. So culture refers to a common heritage or collection of beliefs and values that influence traditions, customs, norms, standard practices, and social environments or institutions. When we talk about ethnicity, that actually connotes a shared history, language, and ritual base. Race deals with how social groups are separated, treated as inferior or superior, and given differential access to power and other valued resources. Notice how in your text, this definition differs from probably the race definition that you're used to, which that has to deal with more characteristics like eye color, skin color, etc. So this is just another way of looking at what race actually connotes. The ideographic perspective, and this is a great view and angle, and this is not foreign considering the views that we take coming from a solution-focused perspective. But each client is regarded as unique, a mixture of characteristics and qualities that make him or her unlike anyone else. When we're talking about cultural diversity, when we're talking about being culturally competent, this is the view that I want to encourage, and I want to challenge you to start to develop. If it's not already developed, then continue to seek this development, and then if it's already developed, continue to develop it further, because it is a lifelong process. But being able to see your clients as unique, regardless of what characteristics that they might bring to the table. Helpers are attuned to those individual differences in clients, and we're fascinated by the idiosyncrasies and personal stories that each client presents and represents. Again, if we're coming from the posture of not knowing, we are wanting to understand this client and what makes them who they are, what stories, what experiences have they lived through, how has their culture played into it, and how do they define their culture. And then we prioritize the individual who's a member of one or more cultural groups. So instead of just seeing a client as a Hispanic woman, and then we can stereotype or make assumptions, which wouldn't be ethical and it wouldn't be social work practice by any shape or form, we can look at her and say, now who is this woman who is Hispanic, who is a single mom, she has 2 children, she's working on her education, she's lived in the United States for 5 years, and she's seeking some goals to further her career. That way, we really individualize a person, and we don't fall into the trap of trying to generalize or stereotype just because of a certain cultural group that they may associate with. So 5 principles of the ideographic perspective is: practitioners should attempt to understand each client from their unique frame of reference. And this isn't new, considering the solution-focused framework that we've been talking about all semester long. Number 2, nomothetic, normative information needs to be considered but may not always fit particular individual clients. In other words, it's helpful for us to know and start broadening our understanding and base of different cultures. So this doesn't mean that now you no longer have to worry about studying about cultures and enriching that part of your knowledge base, because now you're just going to learn about each client individually, because we still use that information. It's still helpful to know about cultures. It's still helpful to know about the different groups in our world and how that impacts, and then the different dynamics that come into play. But don't assume that that information blankets everybody that falls in that category, or even if it might blanket most, because your client might be very different. For example, my background is I was born in the United States, but my mother is Dominican and my father is Puerto Rican. They were both born in their respective islands, but I've lived here all my life. And English is my dominant language. I do speak Spanish and understand it, but it isn't as fluent as someone who maybe has lived here but has been able to speak it in the home, and there's just different cultural elements that I might associate myself more on some of the Americanized view of culture within the Hispanic realm. And so keep in mind that even though I'm a Hispanic female, what my cultural background looks like, because of the mix of me being Americanized, me being born here, my parents, and the influence and culture we had in our family norm, that might be very different from someone else who's also comes from a Hispanic home. And so keep this in mind, that we want to learn from our clients what their actual norm and life system was like, versus trying to assume that just these other pieces of information that we've read apply to them, because everyone is so different. People are a dynamic blend of multiple roles and identities, and so being able to explore and understand what those are. Number 4, reinforcing a comprehensive or holistic view of the individuals. And this goes back to just really understanding all that encompasses who they are, what their role is, if they're a father, what that means to them, if they are working, what that looks like to them, and how that plays into their cultural view of what work ethic looks like, and family values, and those kinds of things. So 5 principles really stem and are reinforced by that posture of not knowing, where we are really just trying to understand our clients and where they come from and how all their cultural pieces attribute to who they are. And so we can understand them in their reality versus perceptions or assumptions of what the cultural view may be. Oops, I missed this one, and it's trans-theoretical. In other words, no matter what theory or clinical practice you might be using, whether you're solutions-focused therapy, whether you go into cognitive behavioral, whether you don't even become clinical and you have a different macro or meso level part of social work that you engage in, this idiographic perspective can apply to all, because it can apply to your work in macro level systems when you're dealing with communities and how those cultural influences may impact your work in those community settings, as well as in groups and families and with individuals. So some guidelines for practicing idiographically, and there are a few here, so we're going to kind of breeze through them since most of them are expanded in your text, and we've discussed at length in other ways. Developing cultural awareness. Each of us has our own background, whether your upbringing and what you were exposed to and what that experience was like. And so allow that to be your foundation, but then broaden your horizons to truly understand and develop and increase your cultural awareness. Avoid imposing your own values on clients, which we've spoken at length about how we don't do that. And accepting one's naivete, that regarding others we may not know. And this completely aligns with the posture of not knowing, and it's even referenced in your text, where this is that ideal that I don't know, and so I'm going to understand, and I want to hear from you, and I want you to help me understand who makes you and what makes you the way you are. Show cultural empathy, so being able to connect and show that empathy for someone's cultural background and what they've been through, as well as incorporating those cultural considerations into counseling. Sometimes we might need to explore further and actually make a segue, because your client might need to be able to address certain things that for them are a cultural norm that for you may not be. And so in order to respect that, we need to dialogue about it so that we understand what the client's needs may be, so we can best see how those needs can be met within the counseling setting. Avoid stereotyping, as we mentioned earlier. Determine the relative importance of those primary cultural roles that your client may have. So being able to ask them and hear what are those roles that they see themselves fulfilling, and then what about it and how are they important to them, so you can get some priority. Avoid blaming the victim. And there's a nice little subcategory in this that I wanted to make sure we briefly address, which is sometimes people might say the comment, "Oh, I'm not colorblind," and they say it with the intention of trying to prove a positive point. But in reality, in social work, we don't say we're not colorblind, because we don't deny the fact that there are differences. We actually embrace the fact that there are differences, and we want to move and learn through those differences so that we can better acculturate ourselves with the clients that we work with. So saying I'm colorblind completely negates the fact that there's differences, and those differences are what make us beautiful. The fact that I am unlike anybody else, I embrace that, and I envelop the fact that no one else is just like me. And so to say that we are colorblind and everyone else is the same and I see no differences completely takes away a lot from the human experience. And so I don't want you to say that. If you have thought that that's a nice way of saying it, I'm sure your intentions were positive, but this is a different way of looking at that statement and realizing that as social workers, we do acknowledge that there are differences, and we're not afraid to talk about them and to learn from them. So remain flexible in how you choose your interventions, because with certain cultural groups or for certain clients, they might need a different approach. Examine counseling theories so that you also acknowledge your bias, and then of course build on your client's strengths, which we have talked about throughout this entire course. And avoid protecting clients from emotional pain. Sometimes they might express things that have happened to them that has been part of their cultural experience or their own life experience, and it can be easy to want to protect them or to want to dismiss that because it is uncomfortable. But instead, we want to really be able to value and honor what our clients are sharing with us and the experiences that they have had, and realizing that some individuals have come through certain circumstances that we may not ever really be able to understand, but we can certainly listen and empathize and respect what they've achieved and what they have survived. Discussing race and ethnicity is an important thing to be able to feel comfortable to do. This doesn't mean that every single client that walks in your door you're going to have to do your normal skills and then segue right into a discussion on race and ethnicity. But it's important to be able to have your filter up so that you can sense when it might be helpful, because sometimes there may be a barrier that might be present where your client might feel that there's this disconnection and they may feel that you may not be able to understand them for whatever reasons. So suspend preconceptions about clients' race and ethnicity. Again, this is coming from that posture of knowing. Recognize that they might be quite different from other people that are part of their racial ethnic group. My example earlier of my own personal background, where in some ways I relate wholeheartedly with my Hispanic heritage, and I can understand certain things, and I completely get certain things, and there are other things that I don't necessarily relate as closely to. And so realizing that every person's going to be a unique makeup of who they are, as well as what their cultural and racial and ethnic groups, how those pieces have contributed to who they are, but you only will know that if you've allowed them to share. Consider how those differences may affect psychotherapy. So if you feel like your client is feeling that maybe you may not understand, or maybe they might be assuming something about you, then be honest with that and allow the conversation to open up, where you can just state what you are sensing, whether you're just wondering if there might be something that the client wanted to talk about that might help with him or her feeling more comfortable to talk with you. Acknowledge that power, privilege, and racism might affect your interactions with clients, where some of them have come through situations where privilege was abused and they have had a misuse of power played on them, and they have been treated ill because of the race that they come from, or their culture, or ethnic, or their language. And so acknowledge the fact that these are realities that our clients have experienced. And when in doubt, err on the side of discussion, where sometimes you might have to take a risk and just say, well, I know this may not be traditional, you might not be used to this, but I just wanted to make sure that if there's anything, sometimes clients feel that it's helpful for them to be able to discuss with me some of their background, who makes, what makes them who they are. That includes their racial, their ethnic, their cultural background, so that way I can understand more about who they are as we continue. So that way that might help our connection to increase. And so if that's something that you think would be helpful, you can keep that in the back of your mind, that might be one way of going about it. This was not quoted in this textbook, but in other research that has been done, it's actually been proven that while sometimes some therapists or even clients might assume that you need to have a therapist or you need to work with a social worker who is like-minded in the sense of having the same race or cultural background, they actually found that for a study that they did, that the clients actually found that it had nothing to do with the person's race, but their ability to empathize and connect with them. And so those skills that you've been learning in this course actually will help you to be able to connect with individuals regardless if they look like you or if they have a similar background as you. So it isn't so much about what matches, but what skill level you bring to the environment that allows that client to feel safe to be able to share, and that they know that you are open to learning and you want to learn. So keep that in mind as well. I know this text slightly gives an angle that might make it seem that you need to be more like your clients in order for them to feel comfortable to share with you, but there is an alternate research out there that does support that it really boils down to the skill level of the practitioner and their ability to empathize versus just their race or their ethnicity or their cultural background. And keep learning. As we just mentioned, it is a lifelong process of learning about people, and that's what makes it such a beautiful profession, is that you never just reach a pinnacle of learning where then things never change again, because people are constantly changing. We're constantly growing for better and for worse. And so keep learning about your ability to discuss race and ethnicity with others, as well as learning about other cultural groups and learning about your clients as well. So I wanted to read through this as we wrap up our e-lecture. And now that you've gotten a condensed version of what it's like to work with diverse populations, I want you to use this information and then apply it to this case study. So let's read for it. Katrina is a 42-year-old light-skinned African-American female who moved from New York City approximately 15 years ago to the small Midwestern town where she currently resides. She moved after a failed marriage and a fallout with her mother, and out of a desire to raise her then 3- and 5-year-old sons in a safer place. Katrina seeks counseling at this time because of increased stressors at home and at work. She manages a landscaping business and also does home renovation during the off-season. Katrina discloses that she is a lesbian and that her girlfriend Elaine is planning to move out. They had a fight last week, and Katrina states she got enraged when Elaine proposed cooling things between the two of them and moving out of the apartment they have shared for 2 years. Look, without her, I have no one, not one person who really truly knows me and accepts me for who I am. Even my sons I know think we're freaks. They haven't been around for a while, and I haven't heard from my mom since last Thanksgiving. This can be too small of a town, you know. Don't get me wrong, there are times when I really like it here, and there are some good people around. I get by, you know. I pass, but... Now, what are your initial impressions of Katrina? As you first heard and read this activity, filtering through everything we just discussed in this e-lecture, what are your initial impressions of Katrina? So given those initial impressions, and given the information that we've discussed, using those culturally empathic skills that you now are starting to fine-tune more and more each day, what do you think life must be like for her? When we look and read the situation, she's a 42-year-old light-skinned African-American female who moved from New York City, which is a very large city, to this small Midwestern town. She has a failed marriage, 2 children. She was trying to get them to a better place. She has stressors at home, and now she has this relationship with her girlfriend that is starting to fall out, and she's having difficulty. She has no support system. Think through on those things that make you feel the empathy and connection to Katrina. What challenges has she likely encountered and experienced over the past 15 years? And obviously, we could ask Katrina this question and explore further, but tuning in your empathic ears to see some of the pieces there. And you can imagine a single mom coming from a big city to a small Midwestern town. Not sure what the ethnic breakdown might be in this small Midwestern town, but she's a light-skinned African-American female. Not sure if she found acceptance in that area or not, if that was a challenge for her. Being a single mom for some culture groups and in some areas that can be really looked down upon as well. So think through about some of those challenges that she may have experienced these past 15 years. She hasn't spoken with her mother for a while. How has the family dynamics and what kind of support has she had all these years? I'd want to know that too. So how would you begin a conversation with Katrina? How would you start off just to understand? I'd want to just get to know her a bit, and knowing that she's having a hard time, especially with this relationship, I'd want to know kind of what are some of the things that she has been through these past 15 years and how she's been able to still succeed and still be able to stick it out. I mean, she's been here for 15 years, and that's a long time to be in a small town. So somehow she's figured out some ways to make it work for her. And so I'd be curious to know what she's done to make this place work for her. And just to get an idea of more of her background, what her family support system's like, and just more of that background and how it either matches the Midwestern town and the values there, or how there might be some things that are different. So then asking what questions might you ask, or what things might you say to help you build rapport with Katrina, and then what else would you need to know that you'd want her to share with you that would help you understand or resonate with her self-described cultural identity, and how might imparting this information represent a risk for you. And so think through on these questions. I think it's a helpful thing to look at a case scenario and then start to just put your lens on of how you would approach this client, how you would be able to start building that rapport with them, how you'd be able to start building and making sure you're being empathic towards their background. I mean, this is a very non-typical circumstance in a sense when you would imagine all the different factors that play into Katrina's role here and how those things might impact her own well-being. And so keep those things in mind. And then what things did you notice would be helpful for you to do to enhance your own cultural self-awareness as you continue working with Katrina? So if this was your client, what would you need to do more? What would you need to sharpen up your skills and your knowledge base on so that you can effectively work with her? So think on those things. It's just a good way of being able to switch gears from information to now application. And to wrap up, I like this picture of diversity and just the beauty in diversity. And this is why we are not colorblind, because how bland would this picture be if everybody looked the same exact way? And yet, when you look, even though it's a black and white sepia type toned photo, you can see all the unique difference and characteristics that these individuals have, and it's beautiful. It is a beautiful representation of the world that we live, the world that God has created, and the way that we as social workers can embrace the diversity that we encounter, and that we can make sure that our clients feel that they are being respected and honored for the culture and the background that they bring to the situation. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.